If you've been playing Hades 2, you've probably clocked that it's a pretty difficult game. And if you are anything like me, it's a little bit of damage all over the place rather than one overwhelming enemy that will eventually lead to the end of your run. By the time you start getting to the lower levels, it's apparent you need some kind of strategy in order to survive. With that in mind, here are my top 7 tips for surviving in Hades 2. Firstly, the best way to preserve your health is to simply avoid getting hit. But that's not quite as easy as it sounds when you have to get up close and personal for a lot of your attacks, and when enemies have ranged attacks of their own that are sometimes quite difficult to dodge. You can mitigate this at least somewhat by looking out for the boons of Hestia and choosing the Soot Sprint when it appears. Soot Sprint will allow you to destroy most projectiles that you touch while sprinting, allowing you to maneuver throughout the battlefield without having to worry about being shot at by common foes. Secondly, if you're having trouble dodging enemy attacks, it might be worth trying to commit to a range build if you find it easier to simply stay out of reach. One of the most powerful ways you can do this is by using your Omega cast skill. Seriously, do not underestimate your cast, as it is one of the most important things in the entire game. The simple reason is that it can stop enemies in their tracks whether or not they're shielded or special. It's important to create space between yourself and the enemy, both so that you don't take damage and so that you can get your attacks off. Because of that, my third tip will be to avoid ever taking the geyser ring. In fact, don't take anything that makes your Omega cast detonate immediately. Sure, you'll get the damage out of it, but you lose the binding effect that traps all the enemies caught in the Omega cast. Observe as I choose Geyser Ring here and immediately botch my entire run. Look how much trouble I'm having keeping a distance between myself and these mourners. Granted, I am playing a bit like a headless chicken here, but their pursuit is so relentless that it's throwing me off, and my once useful Omega cast is now a useless damage burst while my health gets punched away. There is another way to stop enemies though, and that brings me to my fourth tip. Take something that lets you freeze enemies. Freezing enemies with my basic attack is the only way I was able to survive this encounter, but it makes many others a lot easier too. You know how you can't stagger shielded enemies with your basic attack in order to interrupt their attacks even though you can stunlock regular enemies? Well, shield or not, you can still freeze them, which is close to the same thing. You can't refreeze somebody immediately after their frozen status wears off, but you can upgrade your boons to keep them frozen for longer. We're going back to Omega casting with our fifth tip. Yes, it is that good a skill. Your Omega cast usually appears around your character, so trapping a big group of enemies in it usually means standing in the middle of them. Not the best survival strategy, is it? Especially if you're using it to try and keep a safe distance or use a ranged build. Therefore, any boon that lets you throw your cast, such as using Hestia's glowing coal boon, is a must-pick item. You can still cast on yourself if you want to, now you just don't have to. Tip number 6, to illustrate once again why you should never take Geyser Ring, it's probably the worst way to turn your cast into a nuke. Hestia comes in clutch once again here with the Solar Ring boon. Not only does this preserve the trapping power of your Omega cast, but it turns it into a massive fiery nuke that few things can withstand. So this tip is that if you want to try a build based on Omega casting, look for Hestia's flaming boons and take Solar Ring at the first chance you get. It pairs extremely well with the glowing coal boon from our last tip and makes many of the game's fights a total walk in the park. Tip number 7 is pretty simple. Grab some kind of magic regeneration. Ideally, grab one that doesn't force you to stand still in order to regenerate. You can try to play this game without using your magic as much as possible, but you could also try to play it blindfolded, underwater, and with nothing but a Dance Dance Revolution pad as the controller. If you're not regularly using your Omega cast or special attacks, you're basically tying your hands together and making the whole game more difficult for yourself. You need to be able to use magic all the time and have it regenerate reliably quickly. That's all I've got for you today, so I hope you learned something useful. My name is Jason, and this is Hadidar Gaming. If you want to see a lot more, check out Realm Space Gaming, where I'm part of a team that puts out content a bit more regularly. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to be a member of the Hadidar flock.